Vivian Cross sold him the abandoned garage for $2,000 because she thought she was getting rid of rot, debt, and demolition paperwork. Caleb Turner took the key without explaining that some buildings do not look valuable until the right man opens the door. The contract sat between them on a black marble table inside the Cross Development office, 12 floors above downtown Grand Rapids, where the windows were so clean the city looked almost theoretical. Vivian had already signed her name. Her pen rested beside the folder as if the matter had bored her before it was finished. Across from her, Caleb stood in a faded brown work jacket with road salt dried along the cuffs and grease beneath one thumbnail that no amount of scrubbing had removed. He was 33 years old, widowed, and tired in a way that did not show until a person looked at his eyes for more than a second. Beside him sat Emma, 6 years old, her feet not reaching the floor, a small red toy car held carefully in both hands. It had once belonged to her mother. That was why she never rolled it across tables, never let anyone else touch it, and always kept one finger over the tiny scratch on the hood like she was protecting something alive. Vivian noticed the child only briefly. She noticed the jacket longer. People like Caleb made her impatient, not because they were poor, but because they often mistook endurance for strategy. On her side of the table stood Derek Sloan, operations director, holding a tablet with the demolition estimate open. He had been smiling since Caleb walked in. "You understand the roof leaks in 3 places," Derek said. "The west wall has water damage, the electrical panel is dead, and the roll-up door has not moved in years." Caleb looked at the rusted key on the table. "I understand." Derek gave a quiet laugh through his nose. "Then congratulations. You just bought a dead box with a roof problem." Emma looked down at the red toy car. Caleb did not look at Derek. He did not look at Vivian for sympathy either. He picked up the key, turned it once in his palm, and felt the old metal bite lightly into his skin. Vivian leaned back in her chair. She was not cruel. In the loud way. Her cruelty came dressed as efficiency. "Mr. Turner, once this transfers, Cross Development has no responsibility for cleanup, utilities, structural issues, prior contents, pest removal, code problems, or anything else your mechanic optimism discovers." "I read the terms," Caleb said. His voice carried no heat. Vivian studied him for another moment, as if waiting for regret to arrive and prove she had measured him correctly. It did not. Caleb signed the final page with a pen that skipped slightly on the paper. Emma watched his hand move. Derek slid the receipt across the table. $2,000. Caleb had seen men spend more than that on wheels for cars they did not know how to drive. For him, it was grocery math, rent math, school shoes math. It was not a small number. That was why he had measured it carefully before spending it. Vivian stood first, ending the meeting without saying so. "Good luck with your garage." Derek laughed again, softer this time, because the joke no longer required volume. Caleb helped Emma down from the chair, zipped her coat, and walked toward the glass door with the rusted key in his pocket. Behind him, Vivian was already asking Derek about demolition savings on the rest of the industrial parcel. Caleb heard none of it as insult anymore. He heard only the weight of the key, the weather outside, and the quiet voice of his late wife in memory, telling him that some chances come ugly because beautiful ones are usually priced for other people. 8 months later, traffic stopped in front of the building Vivian Cross had once paid someone else to take away. Not slow traffic. Not the kind caused by a delivery truck blocking a lane or a light turning red at the wrong time. Real traffic. A line of cars stretched from the renovated garage doors down Turner Street and around the corner toward the old furniture warehouse, classic Camaros, work vans, delivery trucks, 2 electric SUVs, and a pearl-white Corvette that had drawn 3 people from the sidewalk just to take a closer look. The building that Vivian had called a dead box no longer looked dead. The roof had been repaired in dark standing seam metal. The brick had been cleaned but not made perfect, leaving enough age in it to look earned. 2 glass bay doors had replaced the rusted roll-up entrance. A warm neon sign glowed above the office window, not loud, not cheap, just bright enough to make the gray Michigan morning look less gray. Vivian stood across the street in a camel coat and black leather gloves, her sunglasses lowered in one hand, looking at the line of cars as if the street had personally betrayed her. Derek Sloan stood beside her without smiling. That was how badly the morning had changed. 8 months earlier, Derek had laughed in her office while Caleb Turner put a rusted key into his pocket. Now he was reading the scene the way operations men read expensive mistakes, not emotionally, but in square footage, traffic flow, customer retention, and missed leverage. A local business reporter stood near the entrance speaking with a man from a regional investment group. Through the front glass, Vivian could see a waiting area with clean chairs, framed repair tickets on one wall, and Emma Turner sitting at a small desk behind the counter doing homework beside the same red toy car she had carried in Vivian's office. The child looked comfortable there. That detail bothered Vivian more than it should have. Caleb moved through the shop floor in a navy work shirt, not hurried, not posing for anyone, stopping beside an older man with a pickup truck, then near a collector in a wool coat, then at a lift where a technician showed him a part under a work light. People did not speak to him like they were doing him a favor. They waited for his answer. That was the part Vivian noticed first. Authority had changed hands without asking her permission. Derek cleared his throat. We should have kept the corner. Vivian did not answer. On the building next to the garage, a temporary banner announced 2 more locations opening soon, one near Lansing and one outside Kalamazoo. There was also a smaller sign by the front office mentioning restoration appointments booked 6 weeks out. Vivian looked at it, then at the renovated bays, then at the customers standing in line with keys in their hands. She had spent her career recognizing underpriced land, bad zoning assumptions, and the invisible profit hidden inside ugly properties. She had missed this one because she had looked at the roof instead of the man. Across the street, Caleb bent down to zip Emma's jacket before she stepped outside for a moment. The reporter called his name. Caleb looked up, patient and slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Vivian expected him to search the sidewalk, to find her, to enjoy the reversal. He did not. He placed one hand lightly on Emma's shoulder and guided her back inside, where the garage lights were warm and the first car of the morning was already rising on the lift. The only thing Vivian heard clearly was Derek's silence. It was heavier than his laughter had ever been. Caleb Turner had not bought the garage because he believed in luck. Luck was what people called calculation when they did not see the hours that came before it. At 33, Caleb had learned to measure everything twice because he did not have the money to be wrong once. Every gallon of gas in his old Ford truck had a purpose. Every grocery receipt was folded into the same drawer beside rent notices, repair invoices, and the medical bills that still arrived with his late wife's name printed neatly above numbers that did not care she was gone. He worked as a mobile mechanic across Grand Rapids, driving from apartment lots to office parks to the edges of county roads where people stood beside cars that would not start and tried not to look scared about what the repair might cost. He was good at telling them the truth gently. A bad alternator. A cracked hose. A transmission problem worth walking away from. He never charged for drama. He charged for the work. Emma spent too many evenings in the back seat of that truck, wrapped in a blanket with a coloring book on her lap and the red toy car resting beside her like a tiny guard dog. When she fell asleep, Caleb lowered the radio until the cab filled only with road noise and the soft rattle of sockets in the tool drawers behind them. Some fathers built childhoods out of vacations, soccer camps, and bedrooms painted twice because a child changed her favorite color. Caleb built Emma's out-of-school lunches packed before sunrise, library books renewed on time, and a promise that she would never feel like a burden, even on the nights when he was counting cash under a gas station light before deciding whether to fill the tank halfway or all the way. Before all of that, before the truck and the unpaid invoices and the way grief settled into ordinary chores, Caleb had been an automotive systems engineer for a supplier outside Detroit. He had designed cooling layouts, electrical routing, and diagnostic structures for vehicles most people would never see until a badge had been redesigned and a marketing department had found the right words. He was not the loudest man in meetings, which made some managers mistake him for uncertain. He was not uncertain. He was careful. Careful men become inconvenient when a company wants signatures more than answers. The report that ended his career came from a prototype battery management system that showed thermal irregularities during late-stage testing. The numbers were not dramatic. That was the problem. Small deviations are easy to hide when a launch date has already been announced. Caleb refused to sign the safety summary until the data was rerun under real load conditions. 3 weeks later, the project delay was blamed on him in language polished enough to sound factual and vague enough to be repeated without consequence. He left with a box of notebooks, no recommendation, and a reputation no one had put in writing but everyone somehow knew. Grace, his wife, had been alive then. She had met him at the apartment door with Emma on her hip and listened without interrupting while he explained what had happened. When he finished, she touched the grease mark on his wrist and said, "Then we start smaller." She said it like smaller was not defeat. Like smaller was a place a man could build from if he still knew what he was looking at. 2 years later, after Grace was gone, Caleb lived by that sentence. Start smaller. Fix what is in front of you. Do not spend pride when rent is due. So when he stood across the street from Vivian Cross's abandoned garage for the first time, he did not see a miracle. He saw the slope of the concrete toward the alley drain. He saw the truck route 2 blocks east. He saw 3 repair shops in the area with 2-week wait times and no after-hours service. He saw a building too ugly for a developer and too useful for a man who understood broken things. Poor men do not gamble the grocery money. They calculate what everyone else is too proud to measure. Vivian Cross was not wrong because she was careless. She was wrong because she knew exactly how to measure the wrong things. By 35, she had turned Cross Development from a family-owned property firm into one of the most aggressive industrial redevelopment companies in western Michigan, and she had done it by seeing value where other investors saw inconvenience. Empty warehouses became distribution centers. Failed machine shops became last-mile logistics hubs. Old rail-adjacent lots became quiet money before anyone else understood why truck traffic mattered again. Vivian understood zoning, permits, tax abatements, demolition timelines, commercial leases, and the private language of men who smiled across conference tables while trying to keep the best number for themselves. She was not easily fooled. That made the abandoned garage more dangerous to her judgment, because she never considered that a different kind of intelligence might be required to understand it. The property sat on the corner of Turner Street and Calder Avenue, part of a 5-acre industrial parcel she had acquired from a bankrupt storage company after 6 months of negotiation and a bank officer who needed the file gone before quarter close. On her redevelopment map, the garage was a small rectangular obstruction in the southwest corner, inconveniently placed near the old alley entrance where she wanted a loading access lane. Her planners shaded it gray. Derek Sloan circled it twice in red. The demolition estimate came back at $18,000, not because the building was large, but because the roof had water damage, the wiring was dead, and the crew suspected old oil contamination beneath the cracked floor drains. Vivian looked at the estimate for less than a minute. $18,000 was not a crisis, but unnecessary cost offended her. Derek suggested selling the structure as is to anyone willing to assume the cleanup. Some mechanic will think he found a dream, he said. Vivian approved it before her coffee cooled. To her, the garage was a liability wearing brick. The front sign had been missing for years, leaving only a rusted metal frame bolted above the roll-up door. The windows were clouded from the inside. Rainwater had stained the western wall in long brown lines. A family of weeds pushed through the seam where the asphalt met the foundation. Every spreadsheet told the same story. Remove it, reduce cost, preserve schedule. What the spreadsheet did not show was the truck route 2 blocks east, where delivery vans passed every morning before dawn. It did not show the line of workers from the packaging plant who drove 20 minutes for basic repairs because the closest shops closed before their shifts ended. It did not show the old concrete slab, poured thicker than modern code required, still level under decades of dust. It did not show the alley wide enough for tow trucks to swing in without blocking the street. It did not show the kind of history that hides in places too dirty for developers to tour slowly. Vivian understood square footage. Caleb understood what men with broken cars were willing to drive across town for. The first time Vivian saw him at the property, she remained in her black SUV while Derek spoke to him near the curb. Caleb stood in the cold with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking not at the broken windows but at the roofline, the drainage slope, the alley, the traffic turning off Calder. Emma waited in the truck, red toy car in her lap, fogging a small circle on the passenger window with her breath. Derek returned to Vivian's vehicle amused. "He is interested," he said. Vivian glanced once at Caleb and then back to her phone. "Then sell it before he changes his mind." She did not know he already had. The first night Caleb Turner owned the garage, he did not bring a crew, a camera, or a speech about fresh starts. He brought a flashlight, a push broom, 2 extension cords, a box of contractor trash bags, and Emma, who insisted on carrying the red toy car in the pocket of her coat because she said old places got lonely. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees by the time they reached Turner Street, and the whole corner looked forgotten under the yellow glow of a single street lamp. The garage sat behind a chain-link fence with one bent post and a padlock that gave way after Caleb worked the rusted key back and forth for almost a full minute. The roll-up door did not open. Derek had been right about that. Caleb did not force it. He walked around to the side entrance, checked the frame, lifted the door just enough to clear the swollen bottom edge, and stepped inside with the flashlight held low. Dust moved through the beam in slow silver sheets. The air smelled like old oil, wet brick, and time. Emma stood just inside the doorway, her boots together, looking smaller than usual beneath the high dark ceiling. "Was this somebody's shop?" she asked. Caleb swept the light across the cracked service counter, the empty pegboards, the collapsed shelf along the east wall, and the faded outline where a sign had once hung. "Yes," he said. "A long time ago." He did not tell her that the place felt less abandoned than paused. Some buildings fall apart loudly. This one had gone quiet around something. Caleb started with the floor because floors tell the truth before walls do. He cleared broken glass, old leaves, and the kind of trash left by people who use empty places without caring who owns them next. Under the grime, the concrete was better than he expected. Not pretty. Better. Thick, level, poured with old discipline. Near the rear bay, the broom struck something metal beneath a drift of dust. Caleb stopped. He crouched, wiped the surface with his sleeve, and found a square outline cut into the floor beside a rusted steel cabinet that had been pushed against the wall at an odd angle. The cabinet was heavy, but not anchored. Caleb leaned his shoulder into it and moved it 3 inches. Then 6. Then enough for the flashlight to catch a recessed iron ring. Emma stepped closer. "What is that?" Caleb did not answer until he had cleared the edges. "A trapdoor. Old, sealed. By dust, hidden so well that Vivian's inspectors must have walked over it without seeing anything except another dirty floor." Caleb wrapped both hands around the iron ring and pulled. It resisted, then gave with a dry groan that seemed too loud in the empty building. Beneath it, a narrow wooden staircase disappeared into darkness. The air rising from below was cool and dry, not rotten. That mattered. Caleb told Emma to stay on the first step where he could see her, then descended with the flashlight angled ahead of him. The basement was not large, but it was intact. Shelves lined 2 walls. Canvas rolls sat tied with brittle string. Metal toolboxes had been wrapped in oiled cloth. On a workbench beneath a tarp, Caleb found a steel hand stamp heavy enough to mean something. He brushed away the dust with his thumb. 3 letters emerged first. Then a name. Harlan Reed. Caleb stood very still. Men who loved cars spoke that name carefully, the way some people spoke about musicians who had vanished before the world finished understanding them. Harlan Reed had been a restoration legend, a builder whose work passed quietly through private collections for prices nobody printed unless an auction forced them to. 20 years earlier, he had disappeared from the industry. No final interview. No farewell. Just silence. Emma's voice floated down the stairs. "Dad?" Caleb looked at the tools, the wrapped drawings, the dry shelves, the names stamped into steel, and understood that Vivian Cross had not sold him an empty garage. She had sold him a locked room nobody had bothered to open. By the end of the second week, everyone on Turner Street had an opinion about the garage, and almost none of them had brought a broom. The first morning Caleb patched the roof, a parts runner from the shop 2 blocks over slowed his van long enough to stare through the chain-link fence and shake his head. The second morning, a man who owned a tire store on Calder Avenue stood on the sidewalk with coffee in one hand and told Caleb that some buildings were better left to insurance companies and raccoons. Caleb was on a ladder when he heard it. He did not look down. Emma did. She sat on an overturned milk crate near the side entrance, wearing a knit hat too large for her, the red toy car balanced on her knee. Her face changed in the small way children try to hide when they understand they are not supposed to be hurt by adult words. Caleb climbed down 10 minutes later, not because of the man, but because the flashing around the old vent needed a different sealant. He passed Emma, touched 2 fingers lightly to the top of her hat, and went back inside. That was his answer. Work. The garage fought him without malice. The roll-up door had rusted hard along the bottom rail and moved only 3 inches the first day. The roof leaked in lines that made their own map across the floor. The electrical panel looked dead until Caleb opened it and found 3 circuits worth saving, 2 worth replacing, and 1 that had been mislabeled sometime during the Reagan administration. He worked from 6 in the morning until he had to drive mobile repair calls, then came back after dinner with Emma wrapped in a blanket in the office corner, doing spelling words under a battery lamp while he stripped wire, swept glass, sealed cracks, and carried junk into the alley 1 load at a time. People drove past slowly. Some laughed. Some took pictures. Derek Sloan came by on a Thursday afternoon in a clean black SUV and stopped at the curb without getting out. Caleb was pulling a section of damaged pegboard from the wall. Dust covered his jacket. His hands were raw at the knuckles. Derek lowered the window and smiled the same office smile he had used over the black marble table. Still think this was a business decision? Caleb looked at the garage, not at Derek. More every day. Derek glanced toward Emma, who was tracing letters on a notebook page beside the red toy car. You know, there are easier ways to teach a kid disappointment. The words landed near her. Caleb felt that. He set the pry bar down carefully because some tools should not be held when a man is choosing silence. Then he walked to the electrical panel, flipped the first repaired breaker, and waited. For half a second, nothing happened. Derek's smile widened. Then 1 yellow work light hanging from the center beam flickered, blinked, and came on for the first time in years. It was not bright enough to impress anyone. It did not fill the room. It only made a circle on the dusty floor, touching the old counter, the hidden basement door, and Emma's small red car. Caleb looked up at it, then back at the wall that still needed work. Derek did not laugh again. Outside, the street kept moving. Inside, the garage had begun. By the 3rd month, people were no longer asking why Caleb Turner bought the garage. They were asking how soon he could look at their car. The first customer had been a tow truck driver named Miles Avery, who stopped by at 7:30 on a rainy Tuesday because his own truck had started coughing at idle and the shop on Calder Avenue told him they could maybe get to it next week. Caleb listened to the engine for 12 seconds, asked Miles when the fuel filter had last been changed, and fixed the problem before the coffee in the office had cooled. Miles paid him $80 and sent 2 drivers the next day. The second driver sent his brother. His brother sent a bakery van that had been stalling on morning deliveries. By the end of that week, Caleb had made $140 after parts. He taped the first receipt to the office wall above Emma's spelling list, not because it was impressive, but because it was real. The old garage did not become beautiful quickly. It became useful first. Caleb replaced the broken office window with glass from a salvage supplier, painted only the walls that needed sealing, built a parts shelf from reclaimed lumber, and cleaned the basement one careful section at a time. At night, after Emma fell asleep on the old vinyl couch beneath a blanket, he unrolled Harlan Reed's drawings on the workbench and studied them under the yellow light. They were not blueprints in the ordinary sense. They were conversations between a man and machines, notes about weight distribution, old frame tolerances, hand-shaped panels, and ways to repair what factories had never expected anyone to save. Caleb did not worship them. He learned from them. The first restoration job came from a retired school principal with a 1968 Mustang. That 3 shops had called too far gone. Caleb used one of Reed's old frame alignment notes to correct a twist so subtle the principal had stopped believing anyone could see it. When the car rolled out straight under its own power, the principal stood beside the open bay door with one hand over his mouth and said nothing for almost a full minute. That silence brought more business than any advertisement could have. A collector from Ann Arbor arrived 2 weeks later after hearing that a small Grand Rapids garage had tools marked with Harlan Reed's stamp. He expected a scam. Caleb handed him a wrapped gauge, showed him the stamp, then showed him the repair logs. The collector stayed 3 hours. By summer, the booking board was full 6 weeks out. Work vans came before dawn. Classic cars came under covers. Delivery fleets came because Caleb tracked failures honestly and fixed patterns instead of selling fear. Emma did homework at the little desk behind the counter, the red toy car parked beside her pencil case, while customers learned to lower their voices when Caleb listened to an engine. Nobody had taught them that. They simply watched him work and understood that noise had meaning if the right person heard it. He hired Miles part-time first, then a young technician from the community college named Nora Bennett, then a former dealership mechanic who said he was tired of being told to replace parts when diagnosis took longer but cost the customer less. Caleb trained them the same way Grace had once taught her classroom, patiently, specifically, never making ignorance feel permanent. The garage lights stayed on late, but not because Caleb was chasing applause. He was building a place where broken things came in honestly and left with a record, a reason, and a fair bill. By the time Vivian Cross heard the name Turner Reed Auto Works from someone outside her own company, the garage had already stopped being a building. It had become Trust with Doors. Derek Sloan came back to the garage on a Wednesday afternoon in late July wearing the same kind of smile he had worn the day Caleb signed the papers, but the room around him no longer belonged to the joke. The old roll-up door had been replaced by glass bay doors that lifted quietly on new tracks. The cracked service counter was gone, and in its place stood a clean front desk built from reclaimed oak, the grain sealed but not hidden. A scheduling board covered one wall with 6 weeks of appointments written in careful blocks. 2 work vans waited outside. A dark green Chevelle sat on the lift near the rear bay, its hood open beneath a white work light. In the office corner, Emma worked through a math worksheet with the red toy car parked beside her pencil case, and every few minutes she looked up as if checking that the place was still real. Caleb stood near the parts wall speaking with Nora Bennett about a recurring alternator issue on a delivery fleet. He saw Derek enter, finished the sentence he was saying, then turned without hurry. Derek looked around longer than he meant to. He had expected improvement. He had not expected order. The garage smelled like oil, coffee, clean concrete, and work that had already paid for itself. "You have been busy," Derek said. Caleb wiped his hands on a shop towel. "Cars tend to be." Derek smiled as if that had been a joke. It had not. He glanced toward the framed first receipt on the office wall, then toward the basement door, now restored with a clean steel pull ring and a small brass plate beside it. He could feel the name Harlan Reed in the building without fully understanding it. Vivian understood enough. That was why Derek was there. 2 days earlier, a regional investor had asked Vivian during a redevelopment meeting why Cross Development had not retained the garage corner as an anchor tenant. He had said the question casually, while looking at traffic projections. Vivian had not answered immediately. She had looked at the updated valuation map and seen what Caleb's customers had done to the parcel. They had made the block visible. They had brought daily traffic. They had turned an awkward corner into a destination. The logistics center plan behind it suddenly looked less like the main asset and more like background. Vivian sent Derek with an offer she believed was generous because she still thought in buildings. Miss Cross would like to discuss reacquiring the property, Derek said. Caleb folded the towel once and set it on the counter. She sold it. She did. And now circumstances have changed. They usually do. Derek placed a white envelope on the desk. Emma looked up from her worksheet. Caleb did not touch it. $75,000, Derek said. Cash closing, clean transfer, no delay. You keep the business name, tools, equipment, whatever you want to relocate. Cross Development takes the building back. The shop went quieter, not completely, but enough. Miles Avery stopped writing on a clipboard near the bay door. Nora looked down at the part in her hand and then at Caleb. A customer in the waiting chair pretended not to listen and failed. Caleb looked at the envelope the way he had once looked at the rusted key, measuring not the number but the assumption inside it. $75,000 would have solved problems the old Caleb could name without thinking. Rent security. Emma's school fund. The last of Grace's medical bills. A truck that did not need prayer on cold mornings. Derek knew that. Vivian knew that. They had sent a number designed to feel like rescue. Caleb looked toward Emma. She was watching him with the quiet trust of a child who had seen him refuse easier roads before. He turned back to Derek. No, Derek blinked once. You may want to take some time. I did. Caleb, this is a very strong offer for a property you bought for $2,000. Caleb's voice stayed even. You are not offering $75,000 for what I bought. You are offering $75,000 for what you did not see. Derek's smile did not return. Outside, another car pulled into the lot and waited behind 2 others. Inside, the light over the Chevelle burned steady. Caleb picked up the envelope, handed it back unopened, and stepped toward the bay where work was waiting. Derek had come to buy a building. Caleb was already running something too alive to fit inside an envelope. When the sign came on that Saturday morning in September, no one on Turner Street laughed. The new letters glowed above the restored brick in warm white light, clean against the early fall sky, Turner Reed Auto Works. Caleb had not wanted a ceremony. Emma had. That was why a narrow blue ribbon stretched across the front of the garage, why Miles Avery had borrowed folding chairs from his church, why Nora Bennett had arranged coffee and donuts on the reclaimed oak counter, and why the red toy car sat carefully beside the register where everyone could see it without knowing why it mattered. By 9 o'clock, the lot was full. Delivery vans from the fleet contract lined the curb. 3 classic cars waited near the restoration bay. A representative from a regional investment group stood with a folder under his arm, speaking quietly to a collector from Ann Arbor about expanding the model into Lansing and Kalamazoo. There was no champagne tower, no velvet rope, no speech written by someone who had never held a wrench. Just people who had brought broken cars to Caleb and left with the strange relief of having been told the truth. Vivian Cross arrived 10 minutes after the ribbon was cut. She did not step inside at first. She stood across the street in her camel coat, sunglasses folded in one hand, watching customers shake Caleb's hand as though he had given them more than service. Derek stood beside her, silent in a way that had become familiar. The logistics center behind the garage was still going to be built. Cross Development would still make money. Vivian would still be called smart by people who measured outcomes in reports. But none of that softened the sight in front of her. The corner she had dismissed had become the address people searched for. The building she had called a liability had become the thing that made the whole block valuable. A local reporter asked Caleb what made the business grow so quickly. He looked uncomfortable with the question, as he always did when attention leaned too hard in his direction. "We kept records," he said. "We fixed what was actually wrong. We treated people like they would come back if we gave them a reason to. It was not polished. That made it land harder." Vivian looked through the glass bay doors and saw the basement staircase restored, the Harlan Reed tools displayed in a locked case, the booking board full, and Emma standing near the counter in a blue dress, one hand resting on the red toy car. Caleb crossed to his daughter, bent slightly so she could whisper something to him, then nodded with the seriousness of a man receiving instructions from the only board member who mattered. Emma handed him a small pair of scissors. Together, they trimmed the loose end of the ribbon that had caught on the doorframe. It was a tiny thing. Vivian could not stop watching it. She had sold him 4 walls because she thought value was something a spreadsheet would reveal if it mattered. Caleb had found a name, a history, a community, and a reason for people to trust the light still burning after dark. For a brief moment, Caleb looked across the street and saw her. He did not smile in victory. He did not wave her over to make the lesson public. He only gave a small nod, the kind a man gives when the past is acknowledged but not invited back inside. Then he took Emma's hand and walked into the garage as the first car rose on the lift and the new sign reflected across the cleaned glass. Vivian stayed on the sidewalk while the door opened and closed, understanding at last that she had not sold a garage. She had sold the future to a man patient enough to build it.